Good afternoon. I want to thank you for taking time from your workday to join me to review employment issues for transition-aged youth with disabilities. This presentation is from the perspective of a service provider. Therefore, there will be less of a focus on policy and legislation and more on practical and hopefully doable suggestions. What can you do as a community service provider or a school or a parent or another individual affiliated with a service provider in order to improve the employment outcomes for young adults with disabilities? In our time together today, I will focus on 4 areas. First, some perspectives and goals about work, education, and family. Next, employers and community networking for opportunities for young adults. Government benefits versus personal wealth. And finally, a cohesive and responsive service system to welcome youth. Hopefully, we have a little bit of everything for all of you. Young adults need to graduate from school with a job, period. This should be our mantra. And if we say this enough to ourselves and to others, hopefully we'll all collectively start to believe this and treat it as a given. You know, one of the prevalent themes that seems to resonate among individuals who have spent their career working with transition-aged youth is that one of the fundamental barriers to success is that we have very low expectations. We don't, for example, expect young adults with disabilities to work. And in many cases, we've already identified large segments of this population as unemployable. In my state, for example, the term life skills students is a euphemism for not being employable. But if you were to lean on someone who's serving or otherwise administering services to life skills students as to why this entire group of individuals are not candidates for employment, you're likely to be told that it is because they are life skills students. Now, this example of faulty logic is not a line from a Marx Brothers movie, but rather it reflects a series of decisions that have a profound compounding effect on the direction of an individual's life and certainly their employment goals. Fortunately, I've been spending more time lately with individuals who have increased expectations. And I've heard a number of these people say things like, it is common knowledge that students with disabilities should have at least 2 years of paid work experience before they leave school, and that this will greatly enhance their employability. You know, this seems like an intuitively sound perspective, and therefore, I'd like to validate it with this slide. Now you've read it in print. It's got to be true. You know, if you make this statement with a good deal of reassurance and perhaps a little bit of swagger, it sounds very, very convincing. So I'd like to pause right now, take a quick break, and have you make this statement into your computer. Don't mind if anybody's listening or watching. Go ahead, make this statement into your computer. And remember, I want you to sound very reassuring. Thank you. You know, one of the more frustrating aspects of trying to understand, trying to analyze, and get your hands and arms around the transition phenomena is there's a lack of data about transition outcomes. In the process of providing education and transition services, our states and local schools gather a lot and report a lot of data to the federal government. The number of students by exceptionality, the age, the gender, the district by district enrollment. However, to a great extent, we don't know what really happens to students, particularly on a state and local level, other than anecdotally. Recently, I heard of an initiative in my state in which the Department of Education has promised to track the outcomes of students with individualized education plans at least 1 year outside of school. We're expecting this data to be available not only on a state basis, but equally important, on a district-by-district basis. I once heard someone say that if you don't track it, you can't count it. And if it doesn't get counted, it doesn't matter. Now, I don't know if this was Yogi Berra who made this statement, but regardless, it seems very applicable to the topic at hand. I would suggest that by having this quality of data, that individuals such as yourself, who are interested in making improvements in the lives of young adults with disabilities, will be able to increase accountability and ultimately improve performance in local schools and communities. We know the value and the power of education, particularly when it comes to becoming employed and our earnings. Let's consider some points as illustrated through the census data. As we can see here, individuals who graduate with a high school diploma, who exit school with a high school degree, make a third more than their peers who exit school without a high school degree. And individuals who go on to get a college degree make twice as much, over 100% more, than their peers who only graduate with a high school diploma. And looking at employment status, and here we've zeroed in on the age cohort of people between the age of 25 to 34, the post-transition era, if you will. Individuals who graduate, who exit school without a high school degree or diploma are in the labor market at less than 70% during this point in time in their lives, versus individuals who go on to get a high school degree, nearly 80%, and individuals who go on to get a bachelor's degree or some kind of post-secondary degree are in the labor market at nearly 85% on average. However, let's take a look at the same data and zero in on the group of individuals with disabilities has been provided for us by the census. The red shading represents people with disabilities. And as we can see, it's very reassuring to find that somebody with a disability, that people with a disability, on average, nearly 30% of high school graduates are working. However, if you go on to get a college degree, a bachelor's degree or better, nearly 60% of those individuals are in the labor market between the ages of 25 to 34. But as we stare at this chart for a little bit and we start to consider some of the ramifications of this data, it's rather profound. Across the board, nearly 70% of individuals who graduate with less than a high school degree are working. However, 30% of graduates with disabilities are working. And again, on average, individuals who don't even graduate from school with a high school degree are in the labor market considerably more than people with disabilities who go on to get a college degree. So we might ask ourselves, is there a role for community rehab providers in partnering with universities and colleges, the Office of Students with Disabilities, for example, and career placement offices, to improve the employment outcomes of college students with disabilities? I might certainly hope so. My agency recently got a small grant from a corporate foundation to begin networking with local universities with the goal of serving students with disabilities while they are still in school. We are very excited about beginning this project, which is scheduled to begin this spring. But we're also somewhat cautious about the level of receptivity that we might find from some of the schools. Sometimes institutions act just like people, and they are unwilling to accept or ask for help. I can't imagine that many colleges and universities are particularly proud of a 56% employment rate of their graduates of students with disabilities. In this particular project we call the Armstrong project, based on the foundation grant that we received, our plan of action will involve an informal baseline, a survey of local colleges and universities. We do this to get a baseline, but equally important, we do this as an initial means of marketing this venture to one of our important customers, colleges and universities. Certainly we expect some other challenges: low level of interest among students, individuals unwilling to self-identify. Nevertheless, we think we can provide an excellent array of services, complementary activities such as internships and paid jobs while students with disabilities are still in school. Before moving on to our next topic, a word or two about families of students, of young adults with disabilities, and service providers. Every 2 years or so, my agency conducts an internal survey of our workforce. And one of the sets of questions that we pose is about the non-monetary issues that provide job satisfaction and corresponding job dissatisfaction to our employees. And this past January, when we completed and compiled the survey, the highest ranking job perk was serving people with disabilities and helping them become employed and achieve greater independence. Correspondingly, the highest ranking item of dissatisfaction was working with difficult family members. Now, I don't know whether our 65 or so employment staff are representative of other employment service providers, such as yourself or people in your community. It could mean that our staff have limited compassion or low tolerance for working with parents and siblings who are not necessarily on the same page as they are. I know that oftentimes our staff feel caught in the middle of issues between the person whom they have the mission to serve and the parents or the guardians. Is the parent doing the talking? Is the brother doing all the decision making? Nevertheless, regardless, we would be wise to recognize the tension that sometimes exists between service providers and family members of young adults whom they are trying to serve. I don't know if we can necessarily train away this issue, but honest awareness is a healthy first step. Recently, I had a chance to meet with a group of parents and their teenage children with disabilities through a program called Competence and Confidence, Partners in Policy Making Transition, or the shorthand is C2P2. And in my state, this has been coordinated by Temple University for nearly 10 years, and apparently this is modeled after a program that originated from Minnesota's Partner in Policy Making. Anyway, this group that involved about 30 or so sets of parents and their teenage children, they get together and they get up-to-date information on leadership and skill building, and have local, national individuals come in to speak with them about local, state, and national issues that impact on the lives of people with disabilities. My experience with C2P2 was fantastic. By the time I had met these people, these parents and children had been together 1 weekend a month for 5 months. This group was an excellent celebration of young adults with disabilities, learning from programs and initiatives in our state. You know, while I have had some positive experiences in speaking with groups, my experience with C2P2 and their children, it was in a totally different league. These people ate up everything I had. They were passionate, insightful, concerned. They were a powerful, inspiring group for me. Now, not every parent wants to participate in a group like this or can. But after spending some quality time with this group one Friday night a few months ago, I find it difficult to revert back to some of my hasty, judgmental thinking that floats around about parents and siblings. For example, these parents have unrealistic expectations. We really ought to be thankful that they have expectations, even if at times we feel that they're inflated. If you can hook up with a group like C2P2, I recommend a book that I got out of the library recently called A Different Kind of Perfect. And I have for you a quote that I pulled out from one of the essays. These are essays written by parents and siblings. No parent can be sure of their child's future, but I feel that our son will progress and surpass our hopes. It's almost as if he is keeping his capabilities a secret. I think if we look hard enough, we can find those values and those views in every parent that we deal with. Next section, community networking with business. Last January, the University of Massachusetts Boston issued a press release about a survey which they had done in collaboration with the Gallup organization. The survey called Consumer Attitudes Towards Companies That Hire People with Disabilities. And the first question posed to respondents was, what makes you think favorably about companies? And in order of preference, in order of importance, these over 800 randomly selected respondents indicated that the company provides health insurance for its employees, that the company is environmentally conscious, and finally, that the company hires people with disabilities. It should be pointed out that the respondents answered this way prior to knowing the nature of the survey. This is a great piece of news, an excellent piece of news which you and I need to capitalize on, particularly when we network with business. As community providers, your ability to effectively network with business is a value-added ingredient that you bring to the transition mix. Unfortunately, some schools still offer their work experience inside of the school building. And even when they coordinate activities outside the school, programs often segregate kids into fixed programs. Some parents and children want more. One school that we've now worked with for some years used to routinely bus their children, their young adults with disabilities, over to the local shelter workshop for the entire semester so that the kids could learn to sit on wooden benches and do piecework. I mean, seriously, do you have to spend a semester of training so that you could eventually go to the workshop? Do you have any jobs today? This is really a horrible opening line, and it nearly invites the recipient of that line to say, well, no, I don't. You and I can do better than this. Parents, their young adults, families are expecting, they're counting on us to do more. How about this? I would like to offer you and or your corporation a chance to invest in an important segment of youth in our community. Rather than asking for a handout, I recommend that you pose this as a corporate investment. Think about your first job or two. Everybody can relate to this. Not only you, but the employer that you're speaking with. Think back when you were a teenager. My first paid job was in an industrial park in Philadelphia during high school, and the company made equipment that tested the strength of things like paper and hair. Well, the CEO was about 105 years old, and every day around 10:30, he would shuffle out of his office, walk down, and stare at this huge industrial paper shredder until lunchtime. And this was my first exposure to corporate leadership. It was a small company, and I worked in a number of roles that summer and into the school year next year. Custodian, shipping and receiving. They had me also paint the office suites. And it was a big job, so they got the CEO's chauffeur to help me out. Well, he was twice my age, and he had pointy boots and slicked back hair. And apparently I learned he knew little to nothing about painting, as he would stick the entire brush and part of his hand in the paint can. So much for adult mentors. But believe it or not, we survive these experiences, and we learn things about ourselves. Young adults often miss out on these experiences. Many times, at best, they are being prepared for a specific job at some specific point in time in the future. We've been running a program now at a local university for nearly 10 years, in which they hire teenagers during the summer, all of which happen to be young adults with developmental disabilities. They work on jobs around the campus, mostly in the dining hall. The only downside that we can figure out is that these impressionable teenagers are being exposed to college students' taste in clothes, music, and language. The upside is that it's real work, an integrated setting among individuals who are close to them in age. Making connections. There's no better example of making connections than the Business Leadership Network. And in my state, we have a vibrant network of corporations involved in a number of activities throughout the year. This is not an easy challenge, as it's a big state with a lot of local tendencies and regional characteristics. But we're fortunate to have excellent leadership and boundless energy of our project director for the Business Leadership Network. And I hope that you, your organization, and schools are involved with the Business Leadership Network in your state. For the last couple of years, BLN members have coordinated high school career days. They were not prodded or cajoled to do this. They did not ask for or receive government funding. They did it because it is a wonderfully strategic event. Great publicity for their company. Highmark, Bender Consulting, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Duquesne University. It's a great demonstration of their company's commitment to diversity. It's a great recruitment strategy. And as demonstrated in the Gallup poll, Gallup survey, it's a great way to promote the brand of corporations. You and I are not just looking for jobs for young adults. And we need to provide business with a menu of ways to participate and show and demonstrate interest. So what else might companies be willing to do other than offer paid jobs? Events, in-kind stuff, connections. In other words, they know people and organizations in other industries. And money. Yes, companies give out money. Some might feature rather formal giving programs, and this would require a corresponding protracted formal proposal and dialogue. But other companies have relatively informal giving programs. All you really have to do is ask. You know, when I was younger, there were times when I played take the money and run. I didn't mean I left the country with the money, but rather I did not think through and appreciate the responsibility and the work that's on the end of receiving the money. Sometimes we're thankful just for getting the money, but keep in mind, if we're getting money from local corporations, to make them proud. Let's do some big picture thinking for just a minute. I'd like you to take a look at and appreciate this slide. First of all, I suppose I should be embarrassed to say that it took me well over an hour to create this slide. I wish that someone told me that you can't cut and paste a PDF file. And then the eye-hand coordination it took me to balance the triangles with the words not spilling out. A few months ago, I listened in on a telephone seminar through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It was done by a group called the National Center on Education and Economy, which is where this chart came from. And it laid out, this think tank group laid out its recommendations about education in America. The executive summary is online at their website, but otherwise you have to buy the book. There is, apparently, a worldwide market on low-skilled labor. And the U.S. does not want to compete in this market. You and I don't want to do the jobs that our grandparents did. And instead, we're choosing to compete in the worldwide market for high-value added products and services. Countries that produce these can pay higher wages to their citizens. It requires technology, but even more, creativity. A comfort with ideas and abstractions is a means to a good job. You know, when you consider this chart and these tendencies and these economic factors at work, this does not necessarily bode well for traditional thinking about traditional jobs that we often seek for people with disabilities, particularly young adults. You know, honestly, I remember starting in this business, and there was a job on the books, on the Dictionary of Occupations, called a pin setter. Apparently, bowling alleys used to use human beings to set the pins. The literature about the pin setter suggested that it was a good job for a young man who liked a little excitement, because apparently the pin setter was at work while the bowlers were in the other lanes were still throwing the ball. And you can imagine a group of pin setters getting together for a few beers after work, and somebody mentioning that they heard about a bowling alley on the other side of town which is using a machine to set the pins. And the pin setters went back to drinking their beer. You know, as we spearhead employment for young adults, we need to realize and appreciate the economic pressures that are at work that will impact on many of the jobs that we take for granted today. We need to focus on the skill sets, the transferable skills, as much as the job itself. Often our industry still attempts to train someone for a particular job in the future, and we act as if this job will be here for the duration of the student's career. Perhaps of a more immediate and pragmatic concern are some issues taking place today that are affecting employees, particularly among many of the jobs that we help young adults with disabilities get. First off, minimum wage. There's a lot of differing political and economic angst about increases to the federal minimum wage. You can go around and grab a lot of perspectives on this. Some organizations, for example, the Economic Policy Institute, suggest that it is essential and that it will have a positive impact on over 11% of the workforce in America. I took a look at my own agency's experience last year, and of 424 new placements, 24 of them, or just under 6%, were actually making minimum wage. And if we go into the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they have a report called the Demographics of Minimum Wage Workers that indicates that less than 3% of hourly workers and less than 1% of all workers in America actually make minimum wage. So regardless of where you fall out on the minimum wage issue, we have to imagine that an increase of 40% that's inflicted on business is not necessarily going to create jobs in the short term for young adults with disabilities. Recruitment kiosks and testing. You would think that technology would make it easier to apply at many companies, particularly among some of our service industries, but I hear some reports from our staff about needing to escort young adults into dark kiosks and helping them file their application and take tricky honesty and ethics tests. An example of a question: would you be more afraid of A, the police, B, your parents, or C, nobody if you got caught shoplifting? The correct answer, of course, is, hey, I don't shoplift. But rather than coaching for these tests, in some cases, we need to have dialogue with the human resource managers that some individuals who are otherwise capable and honest, they really just don't understand the question. And recently there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the nation's largest retailer, the company that apparently everybody loves to hate, that it was planning to implement a computerized work schedule for its workforce based on shopping periods. While this is an excellent business strategy, maximizing staff time during peak shopping hours, we can imagine that it can create problems for young adults who would benefit or who need a predictable schedule and who ultimately rely on someone else for their transportation. And finally, in addition to looking for employment for young adults, why not consider small micro business? Years ago, when I first started working at AHEDD, the agency had started an independent for-profit company called Red Rose Services. I really never thought it was very remarkable. On the surface, it looked like your typical mobile work crew, small groups of people with disabilities cleaning office buildings under contract. The difference was that these workers actually had ownership shares in these companies. People had jobs, but equally, or perhaps more important, they developed some personal wealth. I'm thinking aloud in front of you about the endless number of mobile work crews and program opportunities that are afforded through things like Javits Wagner O'Day, and how states often have their own set-aside programs for people with disabilities. And wouldn't it be fabulous if some agencies tried to redesign some of these programs as micro businesses? While it would take some retooling to have these programs spun off to become small consumer-owned businesses, I would think that a lot of the retooling would involve a change in power and control and some of the core philosophy as to why we do what we do. Next section, government benefits versus personal wealth. Can someone do better without government subsidies? Well, yes, the 900-pound gorilla is in the living room. And in respect to the impact of government benefits on transition planning, the gorilla is not only in the living room, he's jumping up and down on the furniture and destroying the hardwood floor. While SSI is an essential income support program, schools and community providers associated with young adults seem to be indiscriminate in how they help individuals access eligibility for SSI, often regardless of the capability of that person. There are still a number of articles and journals and transition journals which refer to SSI as a critical gateway program. But unfortunately, they often point to SSI as the ultimate solution. Now, schools are not the only ones that do this. The state TANF program aggressively channels individuals with disabilities on the SSI. Oftentimes, it's been our experience, regardless of the capability of people. Consider Susan, for example, an inspiring young woman, and I met her last summer, and she was participating in a post-secondary vocational training program, a rather expensive program, I would add. She was learning marketable skills. She even had a job lined up upon graduation, But back home, her caseworker told her that she needed to apply for SSI. Susan was terrified. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to screw up. She didn't want to disappoint her caseworker. Consider other individuals. How about Donald and his representative payee? Donald is 21 years old, recently left school. He's a mental health consumer. He receives SSI. And somehow he managed to connect up with the state vocational rehabilitation agency, who referred him to a supported employment provider, and Donald found himself working at a job where his earnings were above substantial gainful activity. Now his representative payee, who happens to be an adult friend, learned about the Social Security Disability Insurance program and decided that it was in Donald's best interest to access the SSDI program, and he retained a lawyer to help. You can imagine the kind of feedback that Donald is now getting. Here he was working, he was successfully working, and even if he were able to qualify for SSDI, which is unlikely given his work activity, those of you who are familiar with these programs would recognize that there's no financial benefit to Donald. But again, imagine the kind of feedback and guidance that this young man is getting. Recently, my agency conducted a survey among special education personnel in a region in our state. We discovered through this, and the survey was about how do school personnel interact with students who receive or who are applying for Social Security benefits. And what we learned through this survey, and we did this regionally in around a 10-county area, was that to a large extent, school personnel, transition personnel, do not get involved, first and foremost, because they feel that it's a personal family member. Furthermore, when we offered up an array of work incentives, the majority of school personnel could not identify a work incentive, and a third could recognize the name of an incentive, but really knew nothing about it. I hope you can really appreciate the findings and the implications of this survey. You know, you can meet a lot of individuals and organizations, a lot of caring organizations that are giving out inadequate or wrong information about the impact of work on Social Security benefits, but not the school system. They don't even touch it. Let's consider the Benefits Planning Assistance and Outreach, now the Work Incentive Planning Assistance Program, ongoing to work. Our agency last year conducted a survey among beneficiaries, and we discovered that while a third, 27%, were working when they first started receiving services, nearly half, or 40%, reported that they were working 12 months later. And looking outside of our own agency, there's excellent data available on the Vermont Vocational Rehab Annual Report in 2005, in which they tracked individuals who received individualized benefits counseling and discovered that they had over 100% increase in earnings as a result of this service. Unfortunately, across the country, we've had a very difficult time accessing young adults. The last cumulative report that's available indicates that less than 7% of beneficiaries served during the last 6 or so years under the BPAO were actually transition-aged youth. But you know, even when we do connect with schools, it's not strong enough. The Work Incentive Coordinator provides individualized counseling and ideally gives this back to the young adult, their parent, and the transition coordinator. However, to a large extent, this is not really happening. We need to bring these parties closer together. The Work Incentive Coordinator needs to be aware of what's going on with the student's IEP. Likewise, parents, transition counselors need to be aware of what the Work Incentive Coordinator can convey. Recently, our agency got a 3-year grant from a local foundation, the FISA Foundation in Pittsburgh, to underwrite the delivery of work incentive modules to transition-aged youth. The staff and the board at the FISA Foundation really understood what we were trying to do. Suggestion: if you want to do something that you have a passion about, that you care about, don't wait for the government or the Department of Education to reach out to you. Under this project, we are targeting schools in a 10-county region, urban as well as rural areas. We've developed a series of modules about making money, about saving money, work incentives, and we've started delivering them to small groups of students in local high schools. Our goal is to have students learn about managing their benefits and actually access work incentives. We want to see some action. And with this project, we're not leaving until students and teachers demonstrate an awareness, an ability to access things like the student earned income exclusion. A byproduct of this project is to heighten the awareness of special education personnel who are observing the modules. This is not an easy task. The challenge is making this information interesting to young adults and also packaging it so that it's not threatening to parents. We need to remind ourselves over and over again to reassure parents that work incentive counseling is a good thing and no one will get tricked off their benefits. And it's equally challenging to work with school administration. We began with some excitement and some enthusiasm and a brief letter of understanding, and it ended up taking 4 meetings and a memorandum of understanding that's now 4.5 pages long. But so it goes. And if we're also interested in helping young adults make money, saving money should be part of the agenda. We tell young adults all the time to start saving for their future, buying a house, and actually saving for retirement. No one listens to this, of course, certainly not my children. I recently read an article that a significant number of individuals are cashing out their 401ks as they're changing jobs. But you know, at least we start incorporating this information into the socialization process. But unfortunately, for a number of reasons, we exclude young adults with disabilities in this education. First and foremost, a number of government programs inadvertently discourage savings by virtue of their asset eligibility requirements. And as a result, individuals with disabilities get involved in spend-down sprees, new furniture, trips, funeral plots. Now, I'm not suggesting that people with disabilities should not go have furniture or take trips or be buried when they die. But it just seems that we are promoting a set of priorities that are out of line with everybody else. There are a number of disability-specific asset programs, such as the pass through Social Security, the Medicaid buy-in. In my state, for example, the Medicaid buy-in allows a Medicaid recipient to accumulate up to $10,000 in assets, far above the $2,000 asset requirement in the SSI program. Also, things like the Earned Income Tax Credit Program and Individual Development Accounts, which is basically a savings program in which the state will offer $1 for every dollar saved. As we set upon increasing the employment and the earnings of young adults, we can't ignore the need for financial literacy. This includes managing their monthly income and expenditures, building savings, and understanding the short-term, the long-term implication of debt and credit as an important tool for self-sufficiency. A cohesive and responsive service system. You know, we would all like to believe that we are part of a cohesive and seamless service system, a service system which promotes employment and independence. But oftentimes, if it's not murky, it's somewhat of a goofy, dysfunctional system. For starters, which is very difficult to describe to other people. And most of us are very capable of describing our agency or our program or our particular obscure area of expertise. But unfortunately, individuals, young adults and their families often get shards of insights and information about what they might want or need. Furthermore, the priorities of service systems is often driven by a maintenance of effort in which we maximize fees and contracts and at best result in inconsistent in goal planning for young adults. Consider some of these scenarios. A few years ago, an associate of mine submitted a progress report about a young adult who we recently placed. He had reached VR closure and he was moving on to long-term follow-along through funding through the Developmental Disabilities Service System. And in my report, my associate made reference to this person's earnings as pocket change, which supplemented as SSI. Now, I'm certain that many of you that are watching this webcast this afternoon have been involved in helping individuals with disabilities achieve jobs that constitute pocket change. You just never considered writing this in a report. Why stop with reports? Why not put this in our brochures? We specialize in helping people with disabilities achieve pocket change for over 25 years. A little more than a year ago, I was invited to provide some technical assistance to a large organization, and one of the programs, they were trying to improve the employment outcomes of their vocational training program. And they offered a janitorial training program. Individuals came in, and in around 6 months, they received training about janitorial services. I suppose to learn the breadth and the depth, and I suppose the history of janitorial cleaning. And it turns out that this protracted length of time neatly coincided with the duration of time which the county sponsor would subsidize the vocational training. After this incubator period was completed, the state VR was invited to come in and to sponsor placement in which the individual was rolled off onto the agency's payroll for around 90 days. And of course, this persons would be closed successfully. Everyone loves successes. And in my technical assistance role, I had an opportunity to review the financial arrangements and also interview some of the clientele. And one young man who had recently graduated from high school got his driver's license. He had a sparkle in his eye, and he told me how he was looking forward to getting a real job soon. And this brings me to the ticket to work. I love the ticket to work. I did not say I'm infatuated, but rather love. Because when you love somebody or love something, you understand, you accept the shortcomings, and you look beyond them to the essence of what it is that you love. While the ticket to work has drawn a lot of criticism and indifference, I think you might, in the context of 50 years of disability programs, consider that it is a good first step. And you and I have heard on a number of occasions that there's very little money coming down the stream to support disability and service programs, other than perhaps the ticket to work. I know our agency had Projects with Industry grant some time ago, and at the conclusion of this grant, we've been able to cobble together around 30 to 35 agreements with local school districts to provide services to students. At the risk of sounding very patronizing, I'm very proud of the work that our staff have done to work with these individual students under these agreements, because it's taken a lot of work. Many times these agreements are very small, 1 or 2 students. And I don't want to kid you that generally our agency loses money on these agreements, especially when we factor in the networking time. The ticket to work does represent potential revenue for schools, providers, and VR to collaborate. There is nothing that's preventing you from working with any configuration of entities, working together, pooling resources to help young adults go to work, and later using ticket to work income to replenish the pool. But perhaps the greatest reason to welcome something like the ticket to work is that it helps us all to realign our priorities. Rather than striving towards subjective levels of success, or moving individuals through expensive training programs with the goal of maximizing a fee for service, the ticket to work reminds us that the goal is about helping somebody get a job and make real money, earnings which at least suggest that the person has some opportunity for independence. And if parents and young adults encounter an array of providers all pointed in this direction with similar expectations, we would certainly be encouraging many more young adults to elevate their expectations. In summary, you obviously care about the employment outcomes of young adults. What a profoundly honorable profession and calling. We need to work at raising expectations. This includes our own expectations of ourselves and correspondingly of each student we serve. Remember what you said to yourself earlier in this program. Students should have at least 2 years of paid work experience. Determine what you do best or should do best, where you can help. I mean, seriously, what are you waiting for? This is an area where we can find joy and hope working with young adults. Businesses are our partners. A better future for a young adult means a better community, a better, stronger economy. Step outside your own agency and your role and strive to make the system in your community easier to understand. Thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.